All the research shows that if you want people to change their behaviour, then it's not good to make them feel guilty about what they're doing. It's not good to make this into an issue of right or wrong. One of the beauties of the economic approach is that instead of it being an issue of right or wrong, it becomes just an issue of more or less. Should we have more of this sort of energy, less of this sort of energy? Carbon capture and storage is one of the technologies that we'll need if we're going to try and get on top of the climate change issue. The offer of a prize for developing a full-scale power station which uses the technology is something that the previous government tried, couldn't in the end get any firms to take it up. It's an important step because it's a new technology. We'll need lots of these power stations over the coming decades if we're going to carry on burning coal or other fossil fuels to generate electricity, and so it's worth trying again. But we'll need to do a lot more than just offer this one prize for one power station if we're going to really have any kind of real impact and cut our carbon dioxide emissions. The most important thing is to give people the incentives to generate electricity in a clean way rather than in a dirty way. And the most important and easiest way of doing that is to make sure that any emissions of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, are charged. A price is charged either through a carbon dioxide tax. Some people call it a climate change tax or a carbon tax. So anybody who emits greenhouse gases has to pay this tax, and anybody who generates electricity without emitting greenhouse gases then automatically gets an advantage. And then anybody who is using carbon capture and storage on their power stations would be able to get a rebate on the tax, and that would then make them more attractive. The calculations we've done suggest that if you put the climate change tax at roughly the level it should be, which is of the order of £60 for every tonne of carbon dioxide, you would get income of the order of £50 billion a year from doing that. This is about a tenth of the total tax revenue that the UK government has, and you'll be able to do wonderful things with it, like reduce income taxes down to 16 pence rather than 20 pence, reduce VAT down to maybe 15% rather than 20%, and still have some revenue left over. If you have no price on dirty energy, if you don't tax the pollution that's being caused, then what incentive is there for businesses to go green? Well, there's some small public acceptability benefits and PR and so on, but everything suggests that maybe only 10 or 15% of the population are really motivated strongly to go green if it's not in their own economic best interests. So what we need to make sure that we do is make it in people's best interest to go green by making sure that the green sources of energy are the cheaper ones. If we, for instance, make it so that electricity from coal or gas is more expensive and electricity from wind and maybe nuclear power is not so expensive, then people will change their behaviour. They will suddenly discover that it's better to buy their electricity from somebody who's supplying it from wind or from nuclear power or from hydro rather than somebody who's supplying it from coal or gas. So you don't necessarily need to be always hitting people over the head, oh, this is the green thing to do, you must do this because it's right for the environment. You just need to make sure that the price signals are lined up so that when people make the decisions in the way they normally do on value for money, the thing that turns out to be the best value for money is the green source of energy. Corporations, by and large, are run to try and make sure that they generate the right amount of profits for their shareholders in the long term. And one thing that we have seen is that even some of the largest multinational corporations now, when they're looking at the very long term and wanting to survive for the long term, are beginning to say, oh yes, we really must take environmental issues into account, we really must take climate change issues into account, because it's almost inevitable that at some point there's going to be some financial incentive put upon people to go for greener sources of energy. And if we're not ahead of that game, if we're not up on with that development, then we're going to get left behind and we're going to suffer, and our profits are going to suffer. There's still huge pockets of poverty in Africa particularly, but also Asia, Latin America. And one of the worst things that we could do is say, well, no, you can't develop your economies now because the environment is being damaged too much. We've filled up the wastebasket, so we can't allow you to develop. We can't possibly say that to them. So what we have to do is demonstrate to economies like India, China, and then Latin America and Africa that the best way to develop is one that takes account of the earth, takes account of sustainability. And we do that by changing our own systems around, by making sure that we change our tax system so that we get quite large amounts of revenue from ecological taxes, primarily climate change taxes, which allow us to reduce taxes on things we want to encourage, like income taxes and sales taxes or national insurance contributions. We want to encourage people to employ workers so that the unemployment rate goes down. We want to encourage people to buy and sell goods. And so we want to transform our economies so that we're taxing the bad things that we want to discourage rather than the good things that we want to encourage. And all the modelling that we've done suggests that our economy will then grow faster if we do that. It will grow better than if we don't have these kind of ecological taxes. And then the developing countries will notice that. They will see that the economies grow better if you put the appropriate prices on things like carbon dioxide emissions, and then they will want to do that themselves. We won't have to twist their arm up behind their back and force them to take actions that they don't want to take. They will do it because they see that it will be good for their economy. It will enable them to reduce the chronic under and unemployment that they have in their economies. But we have to do it first. We have to show that it works. I'm never convinced that these very large conferences, whether they're Copenhagen or Rio, have a real effect on the policies that governments follow, and therefore the kinds of prices that we face for our energy sources or our other goods and services that we buy. I think they're important because they sort of raise the profile and they're good PR occasions. But the kinds of actions that I think are much more effective in the long run are ones that are taken by either countries or groups of countries who are persuaded of the rightness of charging climate change taxes and other ecological taxes. They can do it themselves in small groups of countries or individual countries. Their economies grow faster and they form if you like, a demonstration for the rest of the world that this can work, and this is the way forward.